My name is Vesper, and I am 34 years old. Last Tuesday, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my mother standing on my freezing Chicago stoop. I hadn't seen her face in nearly a decade. She wore a tailored wool coat, looking exactly as rigid as I remembered, and dragged a leather overnight bag behind her. She didn't offer a hug. She didn't smile. Instead, she handed me a thick manila folder. Inside was an itemized spreadsheet, medical bills for my father, legal fees for my brother's bad investments, mortgage arrears for the family home. The total at the bottom sat heavy and bold, $1.2 million. No, how are you? No questions about whether I had kids of my own now. Just a cold opening. We need to handle the estate before Trent loses the house. But she had no idea what was waiting for her. For 10 years, I've been archiving my own evidence. I'm an accountant, after all. Tracking deficits is what I do. Every package marked refused, every voicemail she deleted without listening, every passive-aggressive holiday photo my brother posted where I was conveniently cropped out. 34 distinct acts of erasure, all time-stamped, all locked inside a vintage cedar cigar box sitting on my home office bookshelf. She showed up with a financial invoice. I had a decade-long receipt of total abandonment. Before I get too deep into this mess, if you just stumbled onto my channel, hit the subscribe button. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I genuinely love reading every single one when I'm winding down at night. It makes the internet feel a little less lonely. Now, let's rewind to the autumn I turned 25, the exact season I got permanently excised from my own family tree. I grew up in a place called Blackwood, Pennsylvania. Population barely hitting 3,000 on a good day. We had one diner that perpetually smelled of bleach and burnt meatloaf, and a single traffic light that blinked yellow past 9 o'clock. My dad, Richard, managed the local credit union for 35 years. He wore the same gray suit every day and let out the same heavy sigh when he unlaced his Oxfords at exactly 6 in the evening. My mother controlled our lives with terrifying efficiency. She ran the local historical society and dictated neighborhood disputes. Nobody ever crossed her. Then there was my older brother, Trent. Broad-shouldered, loud, and practically worshipped. He broke curfews and wrecked cars. My parents just bought him better cars. I was the invisible one. I organized the pantry, pulled straight A's in calculus, and never asked for a dime. Love in our house was a zero-sum game, and Trent held every single chip on the board. I finally escaped when I was 18. Northwestern gave me a full academic ride. On move-in day, my mother actually hugged me. She shoved a thick envelope into my duffel bag with a handwritten note, "Make us proud. Don't forget who you are." I framed that note. It sits on my desk right next to the cedar cigar box, fading a little more every year. It was the absolute last time she ever pretended to care about my existence. My Mateo during my master's program. We were both bleeding through an advanced macroeconomics seminar. He was brilliant, entirely unpretentious, and a first-generation immigrant from Oaxaca. His mom cleaned downtown hotel rooms and worked graveyard shifts so he could learn software engineering. He had this quiet, intense way of looking at you, like you were the only person in the room who made any sense. Our first real date happened at a terrible late-night diner off campus. We split a plate of cold fries and drank awful coffee until the sun came up. He told me he wanted to design software that actually helped people manage debt, not just algorithms that sold them shoes. I told him I wanted a life where things made logical sense. We clicked. It was easy. 3 years of steady, deeply boring, entirely wonderful partnership. He came to Blackwood exactly twice. The first time, my mother served a dry roast and kept asking him overly pronounced, deeply uncomfortable questions about his people's cuisine. The second time, my father barely grunted at him during a football game. I excused it. Small minds, isolated town. I told myself they just needed exposure. Trent set me straight. Over stale beers on the porch, he laughed, shaking his head. He's a nice guy, Vesper, but Mom is never going to accept a Mexican guy in the family. You're kidding yourself. I honestly didn't believe him, not until Mateo asked me to marry him. There was no flash mob or hidden photographer, just the two of us on our fire escape, wrapped in a blanket. He handed me a simple silver band and said, "I want to build a life with you. Are you in?" I said yes before he even finished asking. I called home immediately, absolutely buzzing with adrenaline. Mom answered. I blurted out the news. The silence on the line was thick and suffocating. I counted 8 full seconds. "You are making a permanent mistake, Vesper," she finally whispered. No excitement, just a flat threat. Dad grabbed the extension, sighed heavily into the receiver, and hung up without a single word. 2 days later, Trent sent a text. "Mom hasn't stopped crying. Hope you're happy." 3 days later, the official eviction notice arrived. Not a quick email or a text, a physical, heavily perfumed envelope with my name typed on the front. 4 neat paragraphs written in her flawless calligraphy. The ending is seared into my brain. "If you marry this man, you are erasing yourself from this family. We won't be there, and don't bother coming back. He isn't one of us, and he never will be." She drew a line in the sand, fully assuming I would crawl back and beg to stay on her side. Instead, I folded the letter and dropped it into an empty cedar cigar box. I didn't know why I kept it then, but my gut said I would need the proof someday. Mateo and I got married at Chicago City Hall on a rainy Thursday in October. Just 8 friends stood with us. Mateo's mother took a grueling bus ride all the way from Texas, carrying a homemade tres leches cake on her lap. She pinned a corsage to my thrifted dress, kissed my cheek, and told me I looked like an angel. There was no grand aisle, no string quartet, just a tired clerk in a gray suit who mispronounced Mateo's last name. We celebrated at a crowded pizza joint afterward. We were broke, exhausted, and incredibly happy. But later that night, sitting on the edge of our mattress, I stared at my $20 grocery store bouquet and just broke down. I sobbed until my ribs literally ached. I was a new bride, and my parents hated my choices more than they loved me. A week later, I sent them a wedding picture, Mateo and me laughing under an umbrella. It came back a week later, returned to sender, stamped heavily in black ink. I dropped the unopened envelope into the cedar box. Item number 2. That first year was legitimately miserable. I kept trying to fix something I hadn't broken. I called the house 6 times, always swallowing my pride. It always went straight to voicemail. I left pathetic, carefully rehearsed messages. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Mateo got promoted. I'm finishing my CPA hours. I miss you guys. Call me back when you're ready." She never called. Not once. I mailed a gift for her birthday, a tie for my dad, and a generic holiday card. Every single package bounced back with that same brutal black postal stamp. I filed them all in the box. My dad managed exactly 1 text message the following March, a miserable 3 words. "Give it time." That was his entire contribution as a father. No follow-up, no secret calls. Those 3 words just sat in my inbox, a pathetic monument to his cowardice. The final nail in the coffin happened in May. Trent posted a massive family update on Instagram, a glossy, heavily filtered photo of Mom, Dad, Trent, and his new fiancée standing in front of the country club. They all looked perfect. The caption read, "Sunday brunch with the whole family. Nothing matters more than blood." I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't in the caption. As far as the world was concerned, I simply did not exist anymore. That was the day I stopped calling. That was the day the cedar box became a permanent archive instead of a temporary holding pen. And now, 10 years later, she's standing in my foyer, holding a spreadsheet, expecting me to bail out the very people who threw me away. I had never been invited to that Sunday dinner. I printed the screenshot anyway, not to torture myself, but because my brain needed order. I had started doing this compulsive, deeply neurotic thing, filing the silence. Every package marked return to sender, every digital trace of my family acting like I was dead. I dropped them into the cedar box. By that following March, the box was overflowing, so I bought a heavy-duty binder, black leather, metal rings. He isn't Lavas. My mother's voice would ambush me at the worst times, in the dairy aisle, in the waiting room at the dentist, at 3 in the morning when the radiator hissed and Mateo was fast asleep next to me. I just wanted the echo to stop. It didn't stop, but the volume eventually dialed down. Meanwhile, the binder grew thicker. By our 2nd anniversary, Mateo quit his job. It wasn't a mid-20s crisis, it was calculated. For 6 months, he had been coding a prototype from our cramped living room. It was a compliance platform meant for small architectural and engineering firms, software that made local zoning regulations and permit audits less of a nightmare for companies that couldn't afford a retainer for a corporate lawyer. He knew the software architecture. I knew the bureaucratic red tape. Together, we understood the exact pain point nobody else cared about, making regulatory nightmares survivable for firms with fewer than 50 employees. He set up a workspace in our unheated sunroom, 2 monitors, a space heater that constantly tripped the breaker, and a massive dry erase board he dragged out of an alley. I came home from my corporate accounting job, heated up cheap ramen, and sat next to him running stress tests on the financial models until midnight. I built the fee structures, I wrote the audit checklists, Mateo built the engine. We lived on caffeine and adrenaline.
The platform Zoning IQ launched 7 months later with 3 paying beta testers and a free tier that completely crashed on the 2nd day. That same year, I formalized my evidence collection. The cedar box had served its purpose, but I needed structure. I bought tabbed dividers for the black binder. I used a thick red pen to label everything. Tab 1, Year 1, 7 items. I wasn't building a legal case. I wasn't plotting a grand revenge tour. I was doing what my brain is wired to do, keeping immaculate records. Accountants don't shred documentation. Ever. I started numbering the entries and dating them in red ink. Numbers don't lie, and neither would I. Then came the twins. Leo and Maya arrived on a freezing Tuesday morning in November. 6 pounds each. Maya screamed for 3 uninterrupted hours. Leo slept through the entire ordeal. Mateo wept. I had never seen him cry, not once. He held Maya in his left arm and Leo in his right, staring out the hospital window at the Chicago skyline. "They are never going to doubt they're wanted," he whispered. "Not for a single second." His mother took a Greyhound bus up the very next day. She stayed for 3 weeks. She made massive pots of pozole. She scrubbed our baseboards. She rocked Leo at 4 in the morning so I could finally get some sleep. She brought hand-knit blankets, soft yellow yarn that smelled like laundry detergent, and tiny silver bracelets engraved with their initials. That is what a real grandmother does. 5 months earlier, I had mailed my mother the ultrasound photos. They bounced back. I mailed both announcements. Both bounced back.
I even mailed printed photos. Leo asleep on Mateo's chest, Maya gripping my thumb. All returned. I punched holes in them and added them to the binder. Items 13, 14, and 15. A month later, Trent texted a mutual friend from our old high school. The friend immediately screenshotted it and sent it to me without comment. Trent's text read, "Her kids don't even have real grandparents on both sides. That's the bed she made." I sat in the nursery staring at that text for 10 minutes. The room was dark, except for the amber glow of the sound machine. Maya was asleep. Leo was heavy against my shoulder. I could hear Mateo's mom in our cramped kitchen, humming a Spanish lullaby while she sanitized bottles. My children had a grandmother. Her name was Elena, and she took a brutal bus ride every 2 months and never missed a milestone. I printed Trent's text. Item 16. Red pen. Dated. By year 4, the binder held 19 distinct items. Let me be incredibly clear. I didn't keep that binder to fuel my own anger. I didn't sit around at night flipping through it, dreaming of the day I'd shove it in their faces. Most of the time, I forgot it was in my desk. But every time a new piece of evidence arrived, a rejected holiday card, an ignored email, I filed it. Deleting it felt like gaslighting myself. So I printed, labeled, dated, and filed. Mateo caught me doing it once. He leaned against the door frame and asked, "Why do you hold on to that poison, Vesper?" I didn't hesitate. Because when the twins are 10, they're going to ask why my side of the family never visits, and I am going to give them the actual facts, not my emotional version, not her sanitized version, the receipts. He nodded slowly. He got it. Engineers keep build blocks. Accountants keep ledgers. By then, Zoning IQ had 12 full-time employees. We had moved out of the freezing sunroom and into a small, legitimate office space in the West Loop. Mateo was pulling 60-hour weeks. I was working 40 at my firm and another 20 handling the startup's books. We finally hired a part-time nanny. The absolute silence from Pennsylvania had just become background noise. Year 5 was a milestone. We hit 15 employees and signed a lease for an office with an actual conference room. The growth wasn't explosive, but it was incredibly solid. The kind of revenue that quietly pays mortgages without attracting attention. Mateo refused to step back from the coding. He hated the idea of being a hands-off CEO. He was at his desk by 6 in the morning, buried in server architecture. I handled everything else: the payroll, the aggressive vendor negotiations, the cash flow projections. He built the machine, I made sure it had gas. We bought our first real house that spring, a classic brick bungalow in Evanston. 3 bedrooms, drafty windows, and a massive oak tree in the backyard that the twins immediately claimed as theirs. I remember sitting on the empty living room floor after closing, drinking cheap champagne out of plastic cups. Nobody handed us a dime for this. We built it from scratch. Leo and Maya started kindergarten. They argued over who got to press the crosswalk button every morning. Our life was painfully, beautifully ordinary. Then, on a rainy October night, I made the mistake of looking at Instagram. Trent's wife had posted a massive family photo, a new dining room set. My parents, Trent, his wife, and a toddler. The caption read, "My entire universe." There were 5 people in that photo. None of them were me, my husband, or my children. I locked my phone, pulled the blanket up, and went to sleep. I didn't cry. You stop crying around year 3. The wound doesn't necessarily heal, but all the nerves eventually die. In year 6, my brother bought a massive house. I found out through a forwarded email from an old neighbor. A massive colonial in the best neighborhood in Blackwood. The photos looked like a magazine spread. My parents were prominently featured on the wraparound porch, holding champagne flutes. They didn't tell me. I found out 4 days after his housewarming party. I zoomed in on my dad's face. He looked older, tired. My mom looked exactly the same, immaculate and deeply smug. I stared at the screen, not out of envy. I loved our drafty bungalow. I loved our chaotic mornings. I stared because they genuinely looked completely unbothered by my absence. I did something impulsive and probably masochistic. I ordered an absurdly expensive set of custom wooden blocks from a boutique down the street, spelling out my nephew's name. I included a simple note. "Congratulations on the new home. Wishing you the best. Vesper." The package came back 22 days later. The shipping tape hadn't even been sliced. Item 17. Gift returned. Red pen. Dated. I slid the binder back into the drawer and walked into the living room. Leah was explaining complex dinosaur taxonomy to Mateo, while Maya was trying to feed the dog a carrot. This was my family, and they were more than enough. Year 7 shifted the tectonic plates of our lives. Zoning IQ closed its Series A funding, $8 million from a quiet venture firm in Seattle. I remember the exact moment. Mateo was scrambling eggs for the kids. His phone buzzed. He picked it up, went dead silent, hung up, and looked at me. They wired the funds. My brain ran the math before he even plated the eggs. $8 million in capital meant a post-money valuation of $45 million. We still controlled 30% of the equity. We weren't buying private jets, but the numbers on my spreadsheets had suddenly become very real, very serious money. I quit my corporate job 2 weeks later and officially became the CFO of Zoning IQ. My name sat right next to his on the corporate charter. The funding round got a brief write-up in a tech blog. A few niche newsletters picked it up. Nothing crazy, just the kind of boring financial news that industry nerds read on their commute. But apparently, news travels fast when there's money involved. A month after the article ran, a girl I hadn't spoken to since high school sent me a Facebook message. "Hey, so random, but your mom cornered me at the pharmacy yesterday. She was asking about Mateo's company and wanted to know what a Series A meant. Just thought it was weird." I read the message 4 times. My mother hadn't uttered my name in 7 years. She had no idea what venture capital was, but she suddenly cared to find out. The financial landscape had shifted, and the matriarch of the family was finally paying attention. Later that year, I mailed what I decided would be my final olive branch. 7 years of birthday cards, 7 returns. But this time, I slipped something else into the envelope, a photo of Leo and Maya at a pumpkin patch. Leo had lost his front teeth. Maya was laughing so hard her face was blurry. On the back, I wrote, "They ask about you sometimes. I tell them you live very far away." I dropped it in the mailbox, fully expecting the heavy black return to sender stamp. It came back 9 days later, but something was glaringly different. The envelope was battered, the original seal had been sliced open, and someone had taped it back together with a clumsy piece of Scotch tape. I held it up to the kitchen light. The card and the photo were still inside, but someone had absolutely taken them out, looked at my children's faces, and then painstakingly repackaged the whole thing to mail back. I sat at the island counter for 20 minutes, just tracing the tape with my thumbnail. I knew exactly what had happened. My father had opened it. He had looked at his grandchildren. He probably wanted to keep the photo, and my mother had caught him, forced him to put it back, and taped it shut herself. He was weak. She was ruthless. Item 23, birthday card. Opened, viewed, resealed, and rejected. I labeled it with the red pen, my hand completely steady. I had known for years that my father wasn't the mastermind of this freeze-out. He was just the spineless accomplice. My mother was the architect. Her logic was terrifyingly simple. If she couldn't dictate the terms of my life, she would simply erase my existence. Year 8 hit, and Zoning IQ scaled faster than anyone anticipated. We expanded to 85 employees, opened a satellite office in Denver, and inked a massive partnership with 2 of the heaviest hitter accounting firms in the Midwest. Mateo ended up on the cover of a regional business quarterly. It was a modest print run, mostly distributed in local airport lounges, but his face was front and center under the headline, "The Quiet Architect of Compliance." Around that time, my LinkedIn analytics started acting weird. A completely anonymous profile from Blackwood, Pennsylvania, viewed my page 4 times in a single week. The account had no name and no photo, but the geolocation was glaringly obvious. Then a major financial publication ran their annual Startups to Watch list. Zoning IQ landed at number 42. It was just a tiny blurb, barely 3 sentences, but it was massive validation. I pushed the creepy LinkedIn views out of my mind until Mateo did a guest spot on a specialized tech podcast. The episode dragged on for nearly an hour. They talked entirely about API architecture, federal zoning compliance, and automated reporting standards. It was incredibly dry material. But 4 days later, my old high school friend from Blackwood sent me another text. "Your mom cornered my aunt after mass today. She literally said she always knew Mateo was brilliant. Word for word. My aunt said your mom looked so proud." 7 years of pretending my husband didn't exist, and suddenly she always knew he was brilliant. I didn't file that text in the binder. It was technically hearsay, not hard evidence. But I grabbed a sticky note, wrote down the quote, and slapped it on the inside cover. I needed a physical reminder of the exact moment my mother started aggressively rewriting history. She wasn't experiencing a sudden change of heart. She wasn't feeling guilty. She was doing math. The comma placement in our bank accounts was shifting, and the matriarch was a very specific kind of predator. The group chat screenshots dropped into my lap on a random Monday. The same friend who kept me updated on neighborhood gossip called me frantically while I was sitting in my car at Leo's soccer practice. "Vesper, Trent's wife accidentally added me to a massive family group chat," she blurted out, her voice shaky. "I think she meant to add her sister, who has my exact same first name. I sat in there for 3 days before they realized it and kicked me out. I took screenshots of everything." She fired off 9 consecutive images. 3 days of unfiltered, unedited strategic planning from my blood relatives. I sat in the freezing driver's seat and read them line by line. "Trent, the last funding round valued his tech thing at $45 million. I've been pulling the public records. If they go public, we are looking at hundreds of millions, minimum. Mom, how do we handle this? She ignores my attempts. Dad, maybe I should just call her first, test the waters a bit. Absolutely not, Richard. I need to go out there in person.
We need an actual strategy. Trent, make a hard list, Mom. Tell her exactly what we need. She's an accountant. She respects hard numbers. Mom, what is the baseline ask? Trent, start with clearing my mortgage, then Dad's medical debt, then my kids' college funds, then a monthly stipend. Layer the requests. Make it sound like a family investment portfolio, not a handout. Dad, I don't know about this. It feels wrong. Richard, she has more wealth than this entire county combined. She owes her family. My father didn't reply to that last message. I just sat there with the engine off, the dashboard clock glowing in the dark. Through the windshield, I could see Leo sprinting across the turf, totally oblivious. My hands gripped the steering wheel, shaking violently. I wasn't heartbroken. I felt a terrifying, crystal clear rage.
9 straight years of dead silence. 9 years of returned birthday presents, ignored grandchildren, and a heavily perfumed letter telling me to never come home. And now, the second the financial stakes changed, they wanted to ambush me with a heavily layered family investment strategy. I drove home, fired up the printer, and filed the printed screenshots. Item 26, family group chat leak. Reconnaissance and financial motives confirmed. If you've ever had someone cut you out of their life completely, only to suddenly rediscover their love for you the second you have something they want, leave a comment. I think far more of us carry this exact type of betrayal than we ever talk about in public. And if you're finding some comfort in this, go ahead and hit subscribe. I showed Mateo the screenshots that night after Leo and Maya were tucked in. He read through them with agonizing slowness. He treats emotional bombshells the same way he treats broken code, scanning line by line, isolating the variables. When he reached the last image, he placed the phone face down on the kitchen island and stared at the cabinets. "What's your next move?" he asked quietly. "I have no idea yet, but I am not going to be caught off guard." He just nodded. That was the beauty of Mateo. He never dictated my feelings. He didn't push for reconciliation or demand we hire security. He simply asked what I needed and stood firmly beside me while I figured it out. The very next morning, I called a specialized estate attorney. I wasn't looking to sue anyone. I just needed to understand my vulnerability. If my mother showed up on my porch, could she try to claim any weird grandparents' rights? Could they touch our assets? The lawyer was a razor-sharp woman in her late 50s named Helen. She dismantled my panic in about 15 minutes. No, my mother had zero legal standing. Helen explained that our financial trusts were bulletproof. Illinois law granted absolutely zero grandparent visitation rights without an established pre-existing relationship. 9 years of meticulously documented estrangement made the mere threat of a lawsuit completely laughable. I thanked Helen, hung up the phone, and went straight to the office. But later that week, I did something incredibly cathartic. I sat at our kitchen island at 2 a.m. and drafted a letter I knew I would never actually mail. I documented every single item inside my black binder, every timestamp, every rejected package, every cowardly text message. 26 undeniable pieces of evidence, all categorized, all waiting. Year 9 was consumed by the IPO. The initial public offering process kicked off in February. Heavily suited investment bankers started swarming our Chicago office. We endured endless meetings in that same conference room with the cheap dry erase board. They scrutinized our turn rates, our revenue projections, and our compliance logs. They threw around terms like roadshow pricing and lockup periods. Mateo handled the technical vision. I handled the brutal math. Every slide deck, every risk assessment, every SEC filing required my signature. I was the chief financial officer. Nothing left the building without my approval. The grueling process dragged on for 8 months. 8 months of legal audits and tense investor calls. Mateo lived on espresso. I stopped eating actual meals. Even the twins noticed the strain. Leo asked why Daddy was always yelling at his laptop, and Maya drew a picture of me chained to my desk, saying, "Just one more spreadsheet." In September, Helen finalized the irrevocable trusts for both kids. Fully funded, completely shielded. Not my mother, not my father, not my brother, nor any future relative armed with a sob story could ever touch a single cent. I signed the heavy stack of documents on a Thursday afternoon in a skyscraper overlooking Lake Michigan.
Helen slid the final page toward me and asked if I had any lingering concerns. If someone from my family tries to penetrate these accounts, what actually happens? I asked. Absolutely nothing, Helen replied flatly. That is the entire point of my job. I drove back to Evanston, cooked mac and cheese from a box, helped Maya with her spelling words, and shoved the thick legal envelopes into our fireproof safe. Then I realized something unsettling. The creepy LinkedIn views had abruptly stopped. No more intercepted gossip, total radio silence. The dangerous kind of quiet that usually precedes a storm. 2 months before we officially went public, my brother Trent texted me, the first direct contact in almost a decade. It popped up at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Hey Vesper, just thinking about you today. How are the kids doing? 12 words, 10 years of ignoring my existence, and he just drops a casual, how are the kids, as if we were picking up a conversation from yesterday, rather than resurrecting a corpse. I left him on red for 6 days. I wanted to see how desperate he was. He cracked on day 7. I have a logistics conference in Chicago next week. I'd really love to grab coffee and catch up. Mateo told me to trust my gut, so I agreed. I picked a crowded, overpriced coffee shop in the West Loop, extremely public, strictly neutral ground, with a hard exit strategy. Trent walked in 20 minutes late, wearing a tailored blazer and trying way too hard to look casual. He went in for a massive hug. He told me I looked incredible 4 different times before we even ordered. Then the interrogation started. He asked exactly 35 questions. I kept a mental tally. How big was our lot size? Were the kids in private or public schools? Did we own the building our office was in?
None of Trent's 35 questions included the words, I am sorry. Halfway through my iced Americano, I caught his movement in the window's reflection. He had his phone resting on his thigh, angled toward the street. He was subtly snapping photos of my car, a customized matte black Rivian that Mateo surprised me with for our anniversary. Trent was doing active recon, cataloging the assets, building a portfolio for my mother. I let him finish his overpriced pastry. I gave him the most sterile corporate answers imaginable. When we finally walked outside, he squeezed my shoulders and lingered way too long. He had asked 35 probing financial questions, but he never once asked why we hadn't spoken in 10 years. I drove straight to the house, marched into my office, and opened the black binder. Item 28, Trent's reconnaissance visit, photographed personal vehicle. No apology, financial probing. I dated it in red ink. Then I called Helen again. They are making their move, I told her plainly. My mother is going to show up the minute the IPO hits the news. She has a whole layered strategy. Helen paused. You have documentation, right? How solid is it? A heavy-duty binder, 28 separate items spanning nearly a decade. Helen let out a sharp breath. Listen to me, Vesper. You don't need my services for this part. The trusts are locked tight. Your assets are walled off. What you are facing right now isn't a legal battle. It is a psychological one. You just have to decide what you are willing to tolerate. She was entirely correct. I didn't need a lawyer to handle a woman who only remembered my name when the bank account swelled. I had the binder. It was the complete, unvarnished truth of how they discarded me, simply because I loved a man they deemed unacceptable. I didn't need to explain myself. The records would do the talking. Zoning IQ went public on a crisp Wednesday morning in late October. Mateo and I stood together on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. He wore a sharp midnight blue suit. I wore a tailored cream blazer. We watched the ticker symbol flash across the massive screens. It opened at $19 a share. By lunchtime, it surged to $24. When the bell rang, it sat at $26. The total market capitalization was $480 million. We retained 12% equity. Our net worth, on paper, was hovering around $57 million. $57 million. My brain completely rejected the number. It felt like a typo on a balance sheet. I actually ran the mental calculation 3 times out of habit, but the math was flawless. The media blitz was instant. Major business networks ran segments. A massive tech publication plastered Mateo's face on their homepage. Even the local Chicago News ran a sappy human interest piece. Local tech couple rings the bell. They flashed our corporate headshots on screen. Partners, equals. We celebrated by eating cold pizza in our Manhattan hotel room overlooking the skyline. The kids were safe back in Evanston with Mateo's mom. Mateo crashed on the bed fully clothed by 10 o'clock. I stayed awake. I knew what the morning would bring. I checked my phone at midnight. 6 missed calls. The area code was Pennsylvania. 4 from my brother, 1 from my dad, 1 from my mom. I muted the device, set it face down, and stared at the city lights. 10 years of ghosting and $57 million magically cured their amnesia. The next morning, my dad's voicemail loaded while I was packing my suitcase. His voice sounded thin and raspy. Vesper, I saw you on the television, you and Mateo ringing the bell. I didn't know what to do, so I just called. I am so proud of you. I really am. There was a long, painful pause on the recording. I could hear his heavy breathing. Your mother really wants to talk to you, Vesper. She has some important things she wants to discuss about the future. Just call her when you have a minute. I love you. I listened to it 3 times in a row. He hadn't told me he was proud of me since my high school graduation. It was the exact validation I had craved for a decade. But then I analyzed the timeline. He didn't call when I got married. He didn't call when the twins were born. He didn't call when I mailed 7 consecutive years of birthday cards. He only found his voice the morning after a massive public offering. He was proud of the valuation. He was proud of the optics. But he was never brave enough to defend me when I was just his broke daughter marrying a guy he didn't understand. My mother was the architect of my exile, but my father was the warden who kept the door locked. He chose the year with 57 million reasons to suddenly remember he had a daughter. I saved the audio file, but I didn't log it in the binder. It was too pathetic for the binder. I sat on the edge of the hotel bathtub, let myself sob for exactly 5 minutes, and then washed my face. We had a flight to catch. My mother's text message finally arrived 2 days after we got back to Chicago. It was a massive block of text, flawless grammar, perfectly punctuated. It had clearly been drafted, edited, and reviewed by a committee. Vesper, I know so much time has passed. I think about you and my grandchildren constantly. Life is incredibly fragile, and I've realized that family matters more than the silly differences that divide us. I want to discuss the future and what we can build together. Let's find a path forward. 62 deeply calculated words. Not a single I am sorry. Not one admission of guilt. Part 21. She didn't acknowledge that she had thrown me away like garbage just because of the man I loved. She completely ignored the returned packages, the ignored milestones, the 10 years of absolute weaponized isolation. Instead, she referred to her racism and cruelty as silly differences that divide us, as if our decade-long estrangement was just a casual misunderstanding over dinner, rather than a brutal, intentional campaign of erasure. She didn't acknowledge that she had thrown me away like garbage just because of the man I loved. She completely ignored the returned packages, the ignored milestones, the 10 years of absolute weaponized isolation. Instead, she referred to her racism and cruelty as silly differences that divide us, as if our decade-long estrangement was just a casual misunderstanding over dinner, rather than a brutal, intentional campaign of erasure. She wanted a clean slate because the slate was suddenly coated in gold. I screenshotted the text, printed it, and opened the black binder. Item 29. First direct text from my mother in nearly a decade. 62 words. 0 apology. I labeled it in red ink, dated it, and clicked the heavy metal rings shut. I slid the binder back into the bottom drawer, tucked safely under old tax returns. I sat at my desk and just stared at the framed photo sitting next to my monitor. It was Mateo, me, and the twins at Lake Michigan. All 4 of us squinting into the brutal July sun. Leo riding on Mateo's shoulders, Maya holding my hand. That was my answer right there in the silver frame. A few days later, my old friend from Blackwood called. Vesper, Trent is telling everyone that he visited your mansion in Chicago. His words. He's telling the entire neighborhood that Mateo struck gold, that you drive a 6-figure car and the kids go to an elite private academy. I leaned against my kitchen counter, rubbing my temples.
Half of that is completely fabricated. We live in a normal house and the kids go to public school. That's not the point, Vesper, she interrupted. Your mom is planning a trip. Trent's wife told the receptionist at the dental office that your mother is heading out to Chicago next week. She is actively packing a suitcase. I closed my eyes and let out a long breath. I knew exactly how they had all the details. Trent had spent an entire hour in that coffee shop interrogating me and taking covert photos of my car. What are you going to do? My friend asked, her voice dropping to an anxious whisper. I'm going to open my front door, I said flatly. She sounded genuinely shocked. You're actually going to let her inside? I'm going to let her talk, and then I am going to show her exactly what I've been archiving in my bottom drawer for the last 10 years.
I hung up the phone and just stood in the middle of my kitchen. This was the room where Maya practiced her spelling words, where Leo built massive, structurally unsound block towers, and where Mateo scrambled eggs while listening to jazz on Sunday mornings. On the stainless steel fridge, anchored by a magnet, was a photo of Elena, Grammy Elena, the only actual grandmother my children had ever known. My mother was coming. I had felt it in my bones since the group chat leaked, since the Series A funding, since the anonymous LinkedIn stalking, and Trent's incredibly transparent reconnaissance mission at the coffee shop. The comma placement in our net worth had shifted, and the matriarch was coming to collect her dividends. But I wasn't the terrified 18-year-old girl who left Pennsylvania with a duffel bag and a hollow note telling me to make them proud. I was a chief financial officer. I was a mother. I was a woman holding a decade of receipts, and I was entirely ready. The irony of the situation was almost suffocating. In Blackwood, gossip traveled through the local historical society and the church pews like a virus. When I married Mateo, the Whisper Network had done its brutal work in under 48 hours. Richard and Diane's daughter married a Mexican immigrant. The women at the neighborhood watch clucked their tongues. The men at the hardware store shook their heads. My mother had weaponized that exact social pressure to cut me off, partly because her fragile ego couldn't handle the whispers. But now the current had reversed. My friend told me. The dental receptionist told my friend. The historical society president told the receptionist. Vesper's husband just took a company public. Vesper is a CFO. Vesper is worth $57 million. And the woman who ruled the neighborhood had to answer for why she hadn't spoken to her multi-million-dollar daughter in 10 years. People weren't whispering behind her back anymore. They were asking her directly to her face. You must be so incredibly proud, the neighbors would say. When are you flying out to see the grandkids? Are you spending Thanksgiving in Chicago? My mother had to smile through her teeth at every single inquiry, because admitting the truth, that she had completely discarded her only daughter for marrying a man whose skin was a different shade, would detonate the immaculate reputation she had spent decades curating. The very same town that enabled her to erase me was now demanding to know why I wasn't around. She couldn't tell them we were estranged without admitting she was the one who drew the vicious line in the sand. And she couldn't pretend everything was fine without someone asking to see recent photos. The social pressure had completely flipped. The woman who wielded public opinion like a surgical scalpel was finally bleeding from it. She arrived on a Tuesday at 10:14 in the morning. I know the exact timestamp because I was standing at the kitchen sink, wiping down the marble counter, watching the Uber pull up to our curb. She stepped out of the car with agonizing slowness. She wore a tailored wool coat and black slacks, with the exact same diamond stud she had worn to every formal event since my childhood. She dragged a small leather overnight bag behind her. She stood on our sidewalk for a full 30 seconds before she even moved toward the porch. I watched her eyes track over the house, the restored brickwork, the expensive landscaping Mateo had put in, the custom front door. She wasn't looking at my home. She was looking at it the way an aggressive tax assessor evaluates a commercial property. The doorbell chimed. I opened the door. We stood 3 feet apart on the porch. She looked noticeably older. The gray in her hair wasn't entirely hidden by the dye job anymore, and deep lines bracketed her mouth. Her eyes, the exact same icy green as mine, were already welling with highly produced tears. Vesper, she breathed. Mom? A suffocating silence stretched between us. I counted 4 seconds. I came to talk about the family's future, she finally said. Not, I came because I missed you so much it physically hurt. Not, I came because I realized I made the biggest mistake of my life. Not even a simple, I love you. She came to talk about the future. The future of children she had actively refused to meet. The children whose newborn photos she had shoved back into the mail. The children my brother loudly proclaimed didn't have real grandparents. I looked at her expensive leather suitcase, then at the thick manila envelope gripped tightly in her right hand. Come inside. I didn't take her to the formal living room. I walked her straight to the kitchen. The kitchen had harsh, natural light. It had the island where we actually lived our lives. It had the refrigerator covered in the twins' chaotic finger paintings and Grammy Elena's beach photo. The kitchen was where the absolute truth lived in this house. And the truth was exactly what we were about to serve. She sat at one of the bar stools. I poured 2 glasses of tap water. I didn't offer coffee. You offer coffee to people you want to stay. Her eyes immediately began inventorying the room. They inevitably locked onto the refrigerator. She stared directly at Elena's photo, Elena holding Leo and Maya on her lap, all 3 of them throwing their heads back in genuine laughter. My mother stared at it for 5 brutal seconds. Something ugly flashed across her face. I honestly couldn't tell if it was maternal jealousy or just sheer possessiveness. Then she opened the manila envelope. She pulled out the itemized spreadsheet. It was pristine, flawlessly typed, explicitly detailed, the product of hours of aggressive financial calculation. She cleared her throat and began reading it aloud to me.
Retirement security for your father and me, $600,000. I said absolutely nothing. College trust fund for Trent's children, $250,000. I didn't blink. Medical debt clearance for your father's cardiac issues, $86,000. Silence. Complete payoff of the Blackwood house mortgage, $234,000. And a monthly familial support stipend of $3,000. She placed the paper flat on the marble counter and looked me dead in the eye. This is what families do for each other, Vesper. Your father worked his fingers to the bone his entire life. He sacrificed so much for you and your brother. It is time for you to give back to the people who raised you. I stared down at the list. $1.2 million. Itemized, aggressively calculated, and presented across my kitchen island like a contractor's invoice. Not once during her entire monologue did she attach the word sorry to my name. Not once did she acknowledge the absolute insanity of sitting in a house she had never visited, demanding a fortune from the mother of grandchildren she had never bothered to hold. Her kids don't even have real grandparents. Trent's text echoed violently in my skull. I picked up the invoice, scanned every single line one final time, folded it sharply, and set it back down. Then I stood up, turned my back to her, and walked directly into my home office. The bottom drawer of my filing cabinet was exactly where I always kept it. I shoved the tax folders aside and grabbed the black leather binder. It was incredibly heavy, the dense physical weight that comes from a full decade of obsessive documentation. I carried it into the kitchen and dropped it on the marble island, right next to her itemized list. The thud made her flinch. 2 distinct records. Hers, a single sheet of paper demanding $1.2 million. Mine, 29 separate items, spanning 10 years, with 0 apologies received. My mother stared at the thick black cover. What is that?
You brought a list, Mom, I said, sliding back onto my stool and placing both hands flat on the counter. I brought one too. She stared at the binder, tracing the red ink on the visible tabs through the plastic protectors. She saw the sheer thickness of it. 3 solid inches of printed screenshots, rejected birthday cards still sealed in their original envelopes, and call logs. I don't understand, she whispered. You're about to. I flicked the heavy cover open to tab 1, year 1, and I started reading. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't put on a theatrical performance. I read the documents with the exact same clinical detachment I use when presenting quarterly earnings to our board of directors. Cold, factual, chronological. 10 years of undeniable receipts. Every returned package, every ignored voicemail, every screenshot proving that she had systematically, deliberately eradicated her only daughter from the family tree. Not because I committed a crime, but because I married a man whose background she deemed unacceptable. The binder wasn't a weapon of revenge. It was an immutable record, and records do not negotiate. They do not argue, forgive, or manipulate. They just sit there and tell the exact truth. And I had a decade of truth to unload. I pulled the very first item out of the plastic sleeve, a thick white envelope with a brutal black stamp across the front, returned to sender. The seal was unbroken. I set it on the marble counter between us. Item 1, first anniversary card, mailed October 14th, returned October 25th. My mother's eyes widened in genuine shock. I pulled out the next sleeve. Item 2, wedding photo, mailed November 2nd, returned November 15th. A third envelope. Item 3, holiday card, mailed December 10th, returned December 22nd. I laid them out sequentially, deliberately, the exact way an auditor lays out fraudulent checks on a table. No emotional commentary, just raw chronological evidence. My mother's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She just stared at the growing line of physical evidence, white rectangles defaced by black postal stamps. Every single one was a door I had desperately tried to open, and she had violently slammed shut. These are the cards and photos I mailed to you every single year for almost a decade, I told her quietly. Every last one of them bounced back. Vesper, I am not finished. I flipped the heavy divider to tab 2, year 2. I pulled out a printed sheet. Item 4, voicemail transcript. My words transcribed and timestamped. February 4th, duration 42 seconds. You never called back. I set the paper down. Item 5, a screenshot of Trent's Instagram. Family brunch with my whole world. No Vesper, no Mateo, no grandchildren. My mother pressed both hands flat against her mouth. Her eyes finally spilled over. She let out a choked, ragged sound. It was the exact same highly controlled theatrical sob she used to employ when she wanted maximum sympathy without looking unhinged. The sob she used when the Historical Society didn't elect her president. I was deeply hurt, Vesper, she gasped, tears ruining her makeup. You chose him over your own flesh and blood. You abandoned us. I did not abandon anyone, I fired back, my voice dangerously level. You wrote me a letter explicitly telling me never to walk through your front door again. I was angry. People say things they don't mean when they are devastated. I didn't argue. I just flipped to tab 4, year 4. I pulled out the printed text message. Item 16, text message from Trent to a mutual friend, March 12th. I read the words slowly, forcing her to hear every syllable. Her kids don't even have real grandparents on both sides. That's the bed she made. She physically flinched. Trent didn't mean, he was just... Those were his exact words, Mom. I slammed the heavy pages over to the final tab, the group chat. Item 26, family chat screenshots, leaked to me just weeks ago. I read Trent's message aloud. Make a hard list, Mom. Tell her exactly what we need. She's an accountant. She respects hard numbers. Then I read her own words back to her. Richard, she has more wealth than this entire county combined. She owes her family. The theatrical weeping instantly stopped. The tears dried up like water hitting a hot skillet. The mask slipped, and something much colder, much more familiar surfaced. It was the exact same furious expression she wore when someone dared to publicly disagree with her. Pure defensive anger. You had absolutely no right to read our private family messages, she hissed. I stared at her, completely unblinking. And you had absolutely no right to reject photographs of my infant children. The kitchen went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. I reached into the binder for one specific piece of evidence. Tab 5, year 7. The envelope looked battered compared to the others. The flap was creased, the original glue sliced open, and clumsily resealed with Scotch tape. Item 23, I said, holding it up to the light.
A birthday card containing a photo of Leo and Maya at a pumpkin patch. I know exactly what happened to your mom. Someone in that house opened this envelope. Someone looked at the faces of my children, and then someone painstakingly taped it back together and shoved it in the mail. I dropped the envelope onto the counter. It sounded like a gunshot. Who opened it? She swallowed hard, looking everywhere but at me. Dad opened it, didn't he? I pressed. He wanted to keep the picture of his grandkids, and you forced him to tape it shut and return it. Her hands gripped the edge of the marble island. She whispered something so faintly I had to lean in. I was terrified.
Terrified of what? I asked. She kept her eyes glued to the taped envelope. If I let him keep the photo, if I let any piece of you back into that house, I would have to admit to myself that I was wrong. I would have to admit that I threw away nearly 10 years of my life over nothing, that I missed my grandchildren growing up just because I was too proud to back down. She stopped. For exactly 2 seconds, the polished veneer shattered. I saw genuine, raw terror in her eyes, the kind of fear that ferments under righteous anger for so long it forgets how to breathe. Then, just as quickly, the vault slammed shut. Her spine snapped straight, her chin went up, and the matriarch returned. But you defied us, Vesper. You made your bed. The brief flash of humanity evaporated. I reached across the island and dragged her spreadsheet to the left side. I moved my binder to the right. Look at them, I commanded. Your list, $1.2 million, 5 transactional bullet points, 0 remorse. My list, 29 items, 10 years of absolute silence, 10 years of returning gifts, ignoring milestones, and trying to erase my existence because I married a Mexican man. Her nostrils flared. I didn't erase you. You told everyone who would listen that I abandoned you. You let Trent parade around telling people my kids were essentially orphans. You stalked my husband's venture capital funding online, calculated our net worth, and flew here to hand me a bill. I clicked the metal rings of the binder shut. You aren't sitting in my kitchen because you missed your daughter. You're sitting here because the valuation went up. She stood up so fast the heavy bar stool screeched against the hardwood. After everything we sacrificed for you, the roof over your head, your education, this is how you treat your own mother? Raising a child is not a financial loan, I shot back. It's a biological obligation.
We gave you everything, she yelled, her composure entirely gone. You gave me an empty card that said, "Make us proud," and then you permanently locked the door behind me. She had no counter-argument. I watched her eyes dart around the room, frantically scanning her mental archives for some scrap of emotional leverage. She found absolutely nothing. You swore he wasn't one of us, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. But for 10 years, his mother was the only person who actually acted like a grandmother. She showed up. The words hung in the sterile kitchen air. I watched them hit her. She had nothing left in the tank. The heavy door from the garage suddenly clicked open. Mateo walked into the mudroom, tossing his keys into the bowl and slinging his laptop bag off his shoulder. He stopped dead when he saw my mother. He looked at the $1.2 million invoice. He looked at the massive black binder. He looked at me. He didn't say a single word. He didn't puff out his chest or demand she leave. He simply dropped his bag, walked around the island, placed a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, and stood right next to me. My mother stared at the man she had nuked her family over. He was wearing dark jeans, a faded gray t-shirt, and running shoes. There was nothing about him that screamed $57 million. He was just a guy, a decent, brilliant, incredibly loyal guy, and he was standing right beside his wife, communicating absolute solidarity without opening his mouth. She stared at his hand resting on my shoulder. She looked at the quiet, unshakable space between us, and right then, the reality finally caught up to her. I didn't need her approval anymore. I had built a fortress without her. I looked her in the eye and delivered the final verdict with the icy precision of an auditor. I am not giving you a single time.
Her mouth dropped open to protest, but I cut her off. And it's not because I can't easily afford it. It's because the second I write you a check, you will convince yourself that your strategy worked. You'll tell Trent that this is just what families do. You'll rewrite history and pretend the last decade was just a tiny rough patch and that staying away was the right move until it became profitable. I picked up her spreadsheet and shoved it toward her across the marble counter. It wasn't a rough patch. It was a conscious choice. You chose to return those cards. You chose to ignore those voicemails. You chose to look at a photo of my babies and tape it shut. She didn't reach for the paper. It just sat there, a monument to her greed. If you actually want a relationship with your grandchildren, if you want to know them as human beings and not as an asset class, that starts with a massive unconditional apology, I told her. Not to me, to them. And it doesn't happen today. It happens when you can actually mean it. My mother slowly picked up the spreadsheet. She grabbed the handle of her overnight bag and walked toward the front hallway. She paused at the door, turned around, opened her mouth as if to say something profound, and then just closed it. She walked out. The heavy door clicked shut. It wasn't a dramatic slam, just a quiet, permanent click. The unmistakable sound of someone realizing they had gambled away something no amount of money could ever buy back. 2 weeks crawled by. Mateo and I barely discussed the visit, not because it was a taboo subject, but because the audit was finally over. The ledger was balanced. She got an invoice. I showed her a decade of receipts. She left without apologizing. The math was officially settled. The twins had absolutely no idea she had even been in the state. They were at school during both her arrival and her abrupt departure. I strongly preferred it that way. They will learn the truth about Diane when they are old enough to grasp the painful reality that some people only love you when the lighting makes them look good. My dad finally called, not on a weekend, but on a random Tuesday morning while I was in my office reviewing a quarterly tax compliance form. Vesper, his voice cracked the second I answered. Your mother told me exactly what happened. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and waited. I should have unlocked that door for you 10 years ago, he choked out. I should have picked up the damn phone. I should have driven through the night to Chicago the minute the twins were born. I should have been a father. He paused, his breathing ragged. I am so incredibly sorry, and I don't want a penny of your money. I just want to know my grandchildren. I want to know if you'll let me try. I sat in silence for a long time, 17 seconds. I tracked it on my monitor's clock. I genuinely believe you, Dad, I said softly. But believing you and trusting you are two entirely different concepts. We start at the bottom. A 10-minute phone call every other Sunday. No physical visits. Absolutely no money. Just you and me talking. He let out a shaky exhale. That is so much more than I deserve. It's exactly what you deserve, I corrected him. Nothing more, nothing less. We hung up, and I went back to my compliance forms. Trent texted me exactly once. A single pathetic line. You could have just helped us out. I deleted the thread without replying. Some messages answer themselves. My mother didn't call. She didn't text, and she certainly didn't write. The heavy silence returned, but this time, the silence belonged to her. I had emptied my lungs. The ball was permanently in her court. The heavy black binder went back into the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. 29 items, 10 years. I didn't add a 30th entry. I prayed I would never need to. Here is the absolute truth that a decade of isolation taught me. Family has nothing to do with shared DNA. Family isn't the people who suddenly remember your phone number when your equity vests and your net worth spikes. Family consists of the people who sit with you when your apartment is freezing, your bank account is overdrawn, and you're desperately trying to build something out of nothing. It's the people who take a grueling Greyhound bus across the country just to scrub your baseboards and crochet yellow blankets for your babies. That is what a family looks like. And it was never about the money. It was only ever about who bothered to show up. That's my ledger. 10 years, 29 items, one heavy black binder. If this story struck a chord, if you need a reminder that your human worth is not tied to a spreadsheet, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.